The MG Hector is one of the most important cars of recent times. We drove it almost a month ago in Coimbatore, and still the feedback, the responses and the queries keep pouring in. We've now finally got our hands on a Hector on roads that we are familiar with, and we've got its two main rivals. And since the Hector is such an important car, this is a very important test. In fact, this launches our new comparison test, the Evo India Very Serious Comparison Test.
And since this is a very serious comparison test, we're going to get to the most serious bit first. The prices. The Hector and the Harrier are actually priced very close to each other. These are the top of the line diesels. The Hector comes in at 16.8 lakh rupees, whereas the Harrier comes in at 16.5 lakh rupees. The Creta, meanwhile, is slightly more affordable. It's 15.6 lakh rupees, that too for the automatic, so the manual is even more affordable. It might seem like the Creta is actually the best value for money, but it's not that simple, is it?
Is it the most value for money? Let's find out. Styling is a very critical part of the buying decision today. In fact, most cars get the same engines, transmissions, they ride and handle almost similarly. But what swings the buying decision is styling. And on that front, the Hector, well, you cannot miss it. It is love it or hate it, and styling is actually a personal subject. What you like, I might not like, and vice versa. So you're free to make up your mind on the styling. What you can't deny is that it has definitely got presence.
Do you like how it looks though?
Personally, I prefer the Harrier. I think it is a little more stylish. It is more cohesive because the Hector has got the wheels, even though they're 17 inches, they look very small. There's a lot of gap in the wheel arches. It does not look very cohesive, whereas the Harrier, that is a stunning car. But again, the Hector is new, and on the road, it turns more heads than either the Harrier or the Creta.
That's the problem with the Creta, no? We see so many of them these days that they're just commonplace. You don't turn around to look at a Creta the second time because it's just everywhere.
But you got to remember, the Creta was a stunning design when it was launched, was equally stunning when the update came in. But now the game has moved on, and obviously Hyundai is working on the next generation Creta. Equally important as the exteriors are the interiors, and on that front,
the Hector wins, yeah? Like hands down.
Hands down, the Hector wins. That big screen in the center, the way the whole thing is laid out, the airiness of the cabin, the
sheer space you have.
The sheer space, everything on the Hector, it really scores. In fact, when I was driving the Hector down south in Coimbatore on the media rides, I thought that the Harrier was almost on par. But then after you sit in the Hector, when you jump into the Harrier does not feel as modern, does not feel as up-to-date, and does not feel as desirable.
And something that the Hector has that a lot of new cars are getting is this connectivity, you know, so it's got internet built into the car. You have a lot of features like geofencing, speed alerts, all linked through your phone, and no other car in this segment gets it at the moment. The Hector's the only one.
Yeah, you can do, hey Hector, open the sunroof. It does all that. These are all cool little gimmicks. You could call it gimmicks, but they're cool things. They just enhance the ownership experience. And on the feature count, the Hector really scores way, way above anything else. The only thing that I can think of that the Hector does not have is wireless charging. Correct me if I'm wrong.
And the drive modes. The Harrier gets drive modes.
Harrier gets drive modes. Now you got to remember, all three SUVs here, they're all front wheel drive. So you don't get four wheel drive on them. The drive modes on the Harrier, they basically just change the ECU mapping to reduce the wheel spin, but that's about it. You can't really go off-roading with any of these.
Those are the terrain modes you're talking about. I'm talking about the sport and the eco mode that actually change the way the throttle responds, and it feels a little different. It genuinely
and improves economy.
It does.
Compared to the Hector, the Harrier is a little more fuel efficient, but the Creta is by far and away the most fuel efficient because it is lighter, smaller, got a smaller engine, but does not lose much on performance, and we'll come to that in the next chapter.
Let's talk about upfront performance. The Hector and the Harrier, they actually share the same engine. It's the same FCA sourced 2-litre diesel that we first saw in the Jeep Compass. The Hyundai has a 1.6 litre diesel, that's Hyundai's own motor. In the Hector, the engine makes 168 horsepower. In the Harrier, it makes 138 horsepower. The Harrier has obviously been detuned by Tata. Whereas the Creta, it makes 126 horsepower.
Now, does that really make a difference on the road? it actually does. The Harrier, it has driving modes, it has sport mode, eco mode. You put it into sport mode, the engine does become more responsive, but it is not as quick as the Hector. The Hector definitely feels quicker on the road. It feels lighter, more eager. It also feels more torquey. And as for the Creta, on paper, it might lose out on power, but on the road, its performance is almost on par. Slightly behind the Hector and even the Harrier, but not by that much, not by as much as you would imagine it. In fact, on a good road, a good driver would easily be able to keep up with either the Hector or the Harrier. So on that front, the Creta actually shows that if you add lightness, you can get more power out of and more performance out of a smaller engine. When we're talking about performance, we also have to talk about NVH. And on that front, surprisingly, even though the MG and the Tata share the same engine from FCA, the Tata is more noisy. It's louder, there are more vibrations that come into the cabin. In fact, the best refined car over here is the Creta. Not by much, by a slight margin. And then comes the Hector. The Hector actually is well damped. Of course, you will not mistake this for a petrol. It definitely sounds like a diesel, but it's not a gruff diesel. It sounds like a nice, well-engineered diesel, whereas the Harrier, it sounds a little too loud.
What could be the cause of this? Is it how they mount the engine, or?
I would suspect it's just to do with the mounting and the installation of the engine in the chassis. But apart from that, because both of these guys, both Tata as well as MG, buy the engines and transmissions straight off like a crated engine and transmission from FCA. So in terms of that, it should be the same. So I just think it would be installation and the way it is set up in the chassis. For a channel that obsesses about the thrill of driving, we have to talk about how these three SUVs ride and handle.
Hold on a sec. Before we talk about how they handle, let's talk about how they ride. Because I mean, that's what people buy these SUVs for, isn't it? To get driven around comfortably.
So let's start with the smallest. Let's start with the Creta. The Creta actually is very comfortable. It does not have so much space at the back, so it really is not that sensible if you want to be chauffeur driven in. But it is comfortable, and in the city, it's actually the easiest, the least hassle, the most stress-free amongst the three. Now, in terms of out and out ride quality, and if you're talking low speed ride quality, the Hector is fantastic. It's got a soft suspension setup, and in the city, when you're being driven around, it is fantastic. Don't you agree?
I completely agree. And I think the Harrier has a more maturity to its ride, so it may be a little stiffer at low speeds, but when you pick up speed, it feels better damped. It handles bad roads at speed much better. It doesn't wallow, it doesn't pitch. It's a much more planted ride.
So over there, we have to talk about provenance, because the Harrier, its platform has been taken from Land Rover. It's got the same Discovery Sport and Evoque platform, and shows in the maturity that you talked about. When you see a bad road, you don't have to slow down in the Harrier. And in the Harrier, it does not pitch, it does not wallow, it stays planted, and you can really tackle bad village roads and broken cobbled roads with speed, with aplomb, without a worry. You're not worried about losing control of the car, you're not worried about understeering, nothing. It just goes through, and it feels really phenomenal. It also feels very solid. It feels built to last.
And this whole tightness that it has also translates into the dynamics of it. So when you're driving up a winding road, the Harrier is the one that feels most connected. It feels the most tied down. It feels the one that you can chuck into a corner most confidently.
Whereas the Hector, if you want to drive, that's not the SUV that I would recommend. There is a lot of body roll. So the soft suspension, which does wonders for low speed ride, it actually works the opposite way when you're tackling a slightly bumpy road, because it wallows, it pitches. And even our expressways, they're not well surfaced. There are bumps, and over there, when you're doing over 3-digit speeds, it starts to wallow. The steering is, I think, the weakest link. It is lifeless. It has no precision. It feels very vague and very dead. So the Hector, actually, I would not recommend if you're a driving enthusiast. But to end this talk about driving dynamics, the Creta is actually the surprise of the lot. So we were doing the cornering shots, which you're seeing right now, and the same place, the Hector was rolling, the Harrier, the tires were squealing, and in the Creta, it just went through without even the tires squealing. It's surprising. It does not feel as fast. It does not feel as connected. It does not feel as sporty. But in terms of sheer competence, in terms of the sheer speed that you can carry through corners, the Creta actually is the best, and that is the surprise out here.
Okay, so now we're in a bit of a conundrum. We've got the Hyundai Creta. It lacks the space, it lacks the features, but it sure is the most rounded car, and it's also the most confidence-inspiring car. On the other hand, we've got the Hector, which is not the best to drive, but it's loaded with features and connectivity and space and all that you'd want from a chauffeur-driven car. Whereas the Harrier, it's probably the nicest car to drive here and really push, and it makes you feel like you're driving an enthusiast's car. From amongst these three, obviously. What wins?
It's actually pretty simple, really. Everyone has different priorities when they go out to buy a car, and which one you pick will depend on what your priorities are. Now, if driving experience is secondary and comfort is a focus, get the MG Hector. Nothing else can match it for space or the sheer number of features that it offers. In fact, that value for money equation is just incredible, and it also has the nicest cabin. It is also very comfortable to be driven around in, so if you want something to be chauffeur driven in, that should be your choice. If you enjoy driving and want something that feels robust like a proper SUV, the Tata Harrier is your best bet. You compromise a bit on the features and on outright power, plus the interiors, they don't really make you go wow. But what you get is an SUV with solid underpinnings, and that gives you the most confidence and puts the biggest smile on your face when you're on the road. And also it is the best looking if you ask me. The Hyundai Creta, on the other hand, is the safe and sensible choice. It will last the longest and the ownership experience will be the most hassle-free. It is not a driver's SUV, but it will do everything you ask of it without complaint. It is also the most affordable one here too, but it also looks and feels the oldest, not to mention the smallest. So there you have it, different strokes for different folks.